Massive gains for Mercedes. I'd love to get your thoughts because it looked like things were going well. And then maybe one of the most ominous quotes that came out of testing was Lewis saying, we realize we have a mountain to climb, Lawrence. So where would you rank Mercedes and the job that they did during testing?
Yeah, I had them off the top two teams, so off Red Bull and Ferrari, and then with Aston Martin seemingly pretty close. They had a pretty mixed 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it started out, and the good news on the first day was that they weren't suffering from the porpoising, the bouncing that they had last year, and that really just hindered their development early on in the season last year as they had to try and find solutions for that. It seems that a combination of what they learned and then also the changes to the rules which have been designed to stop these cars bouncing up and down due to the underfloor aerodynamics have worked, and therefore the car is not doing that. Now that's all well and good, but there were still some handling difficulties that the drivers were experiencing, a lack of balance. So when we talk about whether the car is understeering, so they turn into a corner and the car doesn't go where the driver is hoping it to go, it tends to go forward, or oversteer, which is where you see the cars drift sideways and kind of get these big slides on. We saw some remarkable footage of Lewis Hamilton sliding almost like a rally car from corner to corner. Really just, quite beautiful to watch, but obviously not quick for a Formula One car. And so that was concerning. And on the second day, they had all sorts of issues, plus a hydraulic issue towards the end of the day, which stopped George Russell on track, and they lost about 2 hours of testing as a result of that. So the second day was a disaster. And at that point, it really did look like they were in big trouble. Meanwhile, Aston Martin going fairly well in the background. Third day, they did a lot of work overnight. They sent all the data back to the factory where they ran the simulator and just tried to understand what can we do with the setup to just get this car handling normally in a comfortable place for the drivers. And they eventually found that. So on the final day, there were a few more signs for optimism. And that's why I eventually put them ahead of Aston Martin in my order, because there were a few signs, if you read between the lines of long runs, that the car wasn't actually too bad. But look, for a team like Mercedes that's won 8 titles in a row, 8 constructors titles, 7 drivers titles very recently, being third fastest, struggling with issues and just about getting there and getting ahead of a midfield team like Aston Martin is not enough. That's not where they want to be. And so that's why when Lewis said that they have a mountain to climb, it's in reference to their expectations, which is going into these tests and having a car from day one that is behaving itself and then building the performance and then potentially going and win first race. It doesn't look like they're there. And so that's a concern. But look, these things change over time. With some conversations I had down at Mercedes, they felt like, okay, the car's there, that there is some performance. It's lacking compared to Red Bull. They're not shying away from that at all. But at least there's potentially a stable platform on which they can build, which is exactly what they didn't have last year.
Yeah.
So not where they want to be, but compared to 12 months ago, better. Some improvement.
Speaking of not being where you want to be, Nate, what the hell has gone on at McLaren?
Oh, I know. It's just when you think maybe things are turning a corner, a year and a half ago, they've obviously hit some issues. And I've got to say, I think McLaren have been quite lucky. They've come out of that winter test. It was pretty bad. I think they clearly had the worst one. And I think people are so distracted maybe by the Alonso thing. Maybe there's been quite a lot of talk about Mercedes not having the best test ever. There wasn't a huge amount of focus on McLaren, and that also could be because they were pretty frank about how bad it was. They didn't try and dress it up. They said, yeah, we've missed development targets over the winter. So, even when we saw them launch the car, they said, this car you're looking at now, we're not happy with it. We want, this is a long way from where we thought it should be. So clearly there's been an effort at McLaren to really prepare people for how bad the start of the season is going to be. I'm not too worried about McLaren, I've got to be honest. I think that last year showed that they can come back from a pretty rough situation. They obviously had the brake issues this time last year in Bahrain. They had a terrible time in Bahrain. By the end of the season, they were regularly fighting Alpine in that battle for fourth. And let's face it, if Ricciardo had the form that people wanted him to have, they probably could have won that fight. So we'll see what happens there. And it's always worrying when a team admits they've missed development targets over the winter. Obviously, they've got a whole new structure there now with Andrea Stella there. Andrea Seidel's gone. I briefly spoke to Zach Brown yesterday, just between the tests, just asked him how he's feeling, and he was like pretty despondent from the test, but he said it's a great opportunity for the team to kind of show what they can do over the season. So pretty deflating. You know, you look at where McLaren is, you look at a team like Aston Martin potentially making those gains. That's something that McLaren's not been able to do this entire the entire time I've been working in Formula One, really, McLaren has dropped out of that top three and has never really been able to get back in there. So I think a more embarrassing thing for them, there's one thing building a bad car, but it's another thing if a team like Aston Martin, and look, Aston Martin's spending a lot of money, but you compare Aston Martin in F1 terms to McLaren, if you're jumped by them and they're suddenly, making a fight with those top guys, could be a really, really difficult season. Obviously Piastri's coming in, tough situation for him to be in. So yeah, just really bad, and you could tell everyone in the team was kind of just like, there's that meme from I forget which Grand Theft Auto game it is, but it's behind him and he's just going, and he's like, oh, here we go again. I feel like that's what the mood was at McLaren. And yeah, it's just, I don't know, at this point, I don't want to say it's getting repetitive, that's the wrong word, but you just, at one point you're like, are you guys, when is this gonna turn around? Because they don't seem to come out of seasons in the best way at the moment, and you've got to be worried about that. Sure. So yeah, Lando, I'm not sure how impressed Lando was with the whole thing. He's been in this situation before, but I think this could be a year where he starts scrutinizing that contract and looking at exactly how tied down he is to it, because you can't sit in that position for too long if you want to win championships.
No, and I think we all agree he's unbelievably talented, and if he has the right equipment and car, I think that he could be on podiums regularly. I was really looking forward to seeing Oscar Piastri in the McLaren, just because of everything that happened last season with the infamous tweet that he sent out. And now I'm not so much looking forward to it. I'm not excited because they are going to be starting on the back foot. But I guess, Lawrence, this will show us a lot about him as a young racing driver. If he's got a car that clearly is not great, or not meeting the expectations that they had going in, and he's still able to maybe get in the points, or he's still able to perform well, I guess that could, show some optimism for his future in the sport.
Yeah, certainly. If the pressure is off slightly, I mean, a lot of the best drivers came in at the back of the grid because of that exact thing, that you have a little bit less pressure. So if he's not getting the results, and he can say, well, the car isn't very good, then that does relieve some of the pressure. My concern is that if the car is just very difficult to drive, like, previous McLarens, we've seen that has been the case when Daniel Ricciardo went there. We know Daniel Ricciardo is a very good driver. He had been the previous year before he joined McLaren in the Renault, and yet he went to McLaren. He just couldn't get his head around it. So that's my slight concern with Piastri, is that he could be going into a position where he's got a very difficult car to drive that Lando Norris has a better understanding of, because he's had, these years of experience driving difficult cars at McLaren, and Oscar's got to learn from the very basics and build it up. I guess the only positive to that is that he doesn't really know any different. So he's not in the Daniel situation where you're coming from kind of expectations of how a car handles and then having something different. He's going in there and it's going to be what it's going to be. The big thing for McLaren is updates. So upgrades to the car. They're looking, I think, to Baku as a big one, which will be round 4. In a way, they're lucky that the Chinese Grand Prix wasn't replaced with anything else. So there's that big gap, because that gives them a little bit of extra time to work on the development of the car. They will have learned a lot of lessons from testing. They said that they had. They've pinpointed what's wrong with it, which is essentially a lack of aerodynamic efficiency. And when we talk about aerodynamic efficiency, we're basically talking how much downforce you have on the car versus how much drag it creates. So anyone can stick huge wings on the car and get lots of downforce, but if it means you're going very slow on the straight, then you're not going to get a good lap time. So that's where they knew from basically pre-launch that the car wasn't hitting the targets in that area, and they think they know how to potentially resolve that and bring an upgrade around Baku time to help them go forward. Now, if that doesn't work, that's a concern. But I think the first 3 races, they're going to look at it. Any points, any kind of Q3 appearances in qualifying is going to be a bonus, and actually it's going to make the drivers look like heroes if they get there, because the expectations have been set low. But we do see this with teams occasionally. They drop the ball. As Nate said, we've seen it a number of times with McLaren in the past as well. But the hope is that there will be a quick fix, if there's any such thing in F1, but there will be some kind of quick fix that they can then apply and start to be competitive again. Because, like you mentioned, Katie, look at their rivals. Aston Martin, Alpine, I don't see at the moment, based on testing, making a huge step backwards compared to where they were last year, and they beat McLaren over the course of the year. So they've got some tough rivals there. So if they don't sort it out soon, they're looking at a best result of 6, and we know that McLaren, a team like McLaren, they're their worst result they were targeting was fourth. They wanted fourth and a close gap to third. So a lot on their plate to try and resolve over the next few races.
And such a big year for them away from the track as well, because this is the year that they're finishing that wind tunnel. And so there's been so much, put on that about what it means for them long term. So look, that's obviously going to be a huge boon for them going forward, a huge bonus, a huge boost of what they can do. But if you take a huge step back the year that you finally get that wind tunnel online and you can start developing that 24, 25 car, then you just wonder, you're like, man, it's like one step forward, two steps back. So I think that's going to be another storyline this season that's going to be big, is just how McLaren get on.
Let's quickly hit Alpine, Alphas, Haas, and Williams. Just quick takeaways from those teams in their testing going into the first Grand Prix of the season.
Well, as I mentioned, I think Alpine are actually in a pretty good place. They have this weird thing where they never show us like what the car looks like in performance. They never go out and put very soft tires on it and low fuel. But that is consistent with the last several years of their testing program. They just have a different way of trying to understand the car and therefore maximize performance when it counts. So I'm not too worried about them, despite their lap times not looking particularly impressive. And then I think another team that look good from that pack is Alfa Romeo. They had a fairly problem-free 3 days, although they did have a slight issue on the final day. But compared to where they were last year, where they were constantly having reliability issues, hopefully that's a step. And it doesn't seem like they've had to sacrifice any performance as a result. So those two teams are looking good. I'll let Nate comment on the other two and give us updates from Haas and Williams. And AlphaTauri.
Yeah, Haas. I think I completely agree about those two. I think I had a really good feeling about Haas coming away from the test. Gunther Steiner said it was, the most kind of flawless F1 test. I think he was talking more generally because, reliability was so good across the test, but he said that was the case for us. We're so used to Haas having kind of drama around them, whether, obviously 12 months ago, they'd got rid of a driver, they'd got rid of a title sponsor. This year, they've got these two experienced guys in the car now. Their runs all seem to go very well. They didn't have any major stoppages or major problems. Kevin Magnussen tweeted, he said, every single time I've gone testing, whether it's for Haas, whether it's for any other team, there's been some issue. And he said, this year, everything we wanted to do across all 3 days, across both drivers, we did everything. So for them going into this season, that's fantastic. And I think this year, one thing that's going to be key for them is the fact they have Magnussen. We know what he's about, and they're bringing Hulkenberg back as well. And Hulkenberg's got some great pedigree behind him in terms of his experience. So if that car's competitive, I'm really excited about them. And AlphaTauri and Williams, hard to say, but it's pretty obvious they're going to be at the back. But Williams seems to be in a much better place. They seem, they know the position they're in. And I think they had a more encouraging test. It seems like maybe they've cut that gap. Maybe the midfield is now just everybody from fourth down. That might be where we're at come later in the year.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.